Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Joel Bunch. I'm a reference librarian. Just want to welcome you. And genealogy. So if you're interested, check out our calendar online. You can get registered for that. Today's event, we have artist and educator Sean Fitzgibbon. Sean has 20 years of teaching experience. He works at the University of Arkansas in the Fine Arts Department. He's a Master's of Fine Arts, as well as some educational experience from the Joe Kubert School of Design and Cartooning. Today, Sean is going to be talking about his upcoming graphic novel, What Follows is True, Crescent Hotel. Of course, it's about the Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, So please join me in welcoming Sean Fitzgibbon.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. All right. Thank you very much. I just wanted, before I begin, I wanted to show you all this little video. I'm in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign right now. So the books it's funded and it's going to happen. So if anyone's interested, I have little flyers back there that have information about the Kickstarter campaign. So just grab one of those and it'll tell you how to get on there, and it's very easy. Just to pledge. And so now it's more like a and let's see here. Yeah, that's really about it. I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about my interest in the Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, like why I did this, and so and just tell you a little bit about that journey. And so anyway, oh yeah, I also have little preview books back there. So if anyone's interested in one of those, oh yeah, I wanted to show a little video, and this is like a little video that's on my Kickstarter page, and so we can kind of watch. It's just a couple minutes. Kind of watch that to sort of set the mood for the for the talk here. So because it is the Crescent Hotel when it was a kind of a cancer hospital run by a fraudulent medical practitioner by the name of Norman Baker. So it is kind of spooky material, and I actually did. That was my reason for doing and it ends on Halloween, so that was all by design. all by design. So anyway, so here I'll back that up. Okay. Here we go. So. Can you hear that? Or oh, hold on just 1 second here. Oh, sorry about that. I should have. It's not like that necessary. It's just kind of some eerie music is all. Sure. But
no, this is a real easy fix.
sorry about that.
Oh, you're totally fine. Okay, well, I hear it.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So that's my little Kickstarter video there. And, whoops, let's see here. Yeah, okay, good. So I finished this project, 2019 is when I finished it, which I've actually worked on this thing for over a decade, well over a decade. For almost 15 years, off and on, working in between working on other projects. But I've these last 10 to 5 years, I've been really devoting most of my spare time on finishing this book. And so what was interesting is in 2019, that was the year I kind of finished all the work on the art and all the writing, that kind of stuff. The book, there was a very grim discovery that was made at the Crescent Hotel, and it garnished national attention. I don't know if you all are aware of this, but yeah, there were. So a landscaper was out, digging on the grounds of the Crescent, and these jars came tumbling out as soon as they started digging, and these jars contained what appeared to be human tissue, along with cancer elixir, a bone saw, and reels of 16 millimeter film proclaiming his cancer cure. So at first, whenever they found these, they didn't know that it was, dated back to the years when it was the cancer hospital in the late 1930s. So it was a crime scene, right at first, and the samples were sent off to state crime labs for analysis. But then once they realized, then it became more of like an archaeological type scene. So it was really, really interesting, because what I found so fascinating about that is that I actually knew, I was like, oh, I know exactly what that is whenever they first announced that they found these jars. And all now to whenever I was a kid, and why my fascination with Eureka Springs and why the Crescent Hotel. So when I was a little kid, my family, we would travel to Eureka Springs just on little vacations. And I've always was fascinated by this very Victorian town with this little hamlet, that lies kind of wedged in between the Ozarks and Boston mountain ranges, with its very odd and elaborate and quaint Queen Anne dwellings that are kind of perched on these limestone bluffs. And it's because of the way those bluffs are, they're limestone, so they're actually able to build the town in such a way that they can precariously be perched on these, on these bluffs. Because in most cases, architecturally, you couldn't do that because a house would just like slide down the mountain, but because of the fact that it's on those bluffs that are made of limestone, it's like they're able to withstand that. But you have these steep, jagged elevations, and you have what I always found so fascinating. I mean, I remember my parents would tell me about this. It's like these serpentine roads that don't not would proclaimed back in the day. And so I always found that very interesting. And then I found later, as you can see down here, can you see my little, let's see, I don't know if I can do a little, maybe I can do like a little laser pointer here. Let's see here. Yeah, down here, there's actually a subterranean portion of the town as well. So they call that the Eureka Underground. You can actually explore underneath the main street because they actually built it up and actually floor a level. So there's a subterranean portion. So it's so wild. There are so many aspects that are just fascinating to me. And I'm still just amazed by that sort of aberrant maze-like geometry and geology of the town. And even like another, I think this was another Ripley's Believe It or Not type thing, was the Basin Park Hotel. And it's 7 stories, but every floor is ground level. So that's kind of wild. I think it's the only hotel in the world where that's the case, that can proclaim that. And that's because it's built up on a mountain. So every floor you get out, you're at ground level. So anyway, I always thought that was pretty interesting. And it's also the only city in the U.S. where the entire downtown is on the historic registry. That's another thing that I didn't find out until much later, until like I was in grad school. I learned that aspect. So there's just so many different unique things about the town. None of the streets cross at right angles. There's no stoplights in the town. The layout's just completely irregular. Natural elements, Victorian architecture just sort of coalesce, where houses and buildings cling to these steep mountainsides and along these deep gorges, canals. And another thing that's always fascinated me is that you can see kind of like that painting. These are all images from my book. So I painted the entire book. It's 240 pages, fully painted. And these are all from the book. But yeah, it's like you can, like most towns, you look at a picture or you can see a picture of like a street and then the street like it was 100 years ago. And you can kind of make out a lot of times, but it's a lot different. Eureka Springs is so well preserved that you can just look at almost any site in Eureka and you're like, oh yeah, I know exactly where that is, because it's just so well preserved. So anyway, however, the most compelling thing to me as a child going to the Eureka Springs with my family was always the Crescent Hotel. Ghost tours, and I learned all kinds of interesting things about it. So what about the Crescent Hotel? What's so unusual about this? Well, let me tell you just a little brief history about it. So the hotel itself was built in 1886. Eureka Springs was rapidly becoming this well-known health resort area because of those springs, the healing springs. And then this is Arkansas Governor Clayton, or Powell Clayton. I always want to say Clayton Powell, but Powell Clayton was instrumental in this reconstruction period of developing that Victorian sort of town that we know today. And he was also instrumental in getting the railroad built. So that's what brought all the tourism into Eureka Springs in the late 1800s. So and he was responsible for also the Crescent Hotel and getting that built. So, which it was a very exclusive hotel at its time. It was very, very hard to get in because it was only world-class sort of notables would stay there. It was decked out in it had Edison lighting, it had intercom system, elevators. It had a bowling alley, tennis courts. Very, very exclusive. Like, think of the most exclusive club in like Los Angeles, and that's about what it was like to get into the Crescent Hotel at that time. Very, very, very exclusive. So anyway, the hotel was designed by a guy by the name of Isaac Stockton Taylor, and it was designed, he's a St. Louis architect, and it's done in a very American Gothic style, and he utilized rocks, limestone that was quarried from the nearby White River. And in fact, they didn't even use mortar on it. It's just all stacked on one another. So it's actually something that I just remembered. But yeah, that's another interesting thing about that. But sadly, despite all of the Crescent Hotel splendor, it wasn't lucrative. Like, after about the first decade, they just weren't able to sort of sustain it. And so then in 1908, the Crescent College and Conservatory for Young Women was established. And this was a thing they did, to supplement lagging winter business, so they turn it into the girls' school in the winter, and then in the summer, it would be more of kind of the resort like it was before. But then sadly, the Great Depression came along, and that ended both the hotel and the girls' school. So that was pretty much that was about it. So in 1934. So anyway, and it sat empty, of course, for rodents and maybe there, but until 1937, and that is when Norman Baker came along, and that marks the beginning of the most unusual chapter in this very unique piece of real estate's history, and so anyway, once again, I want to kind of stop right there and go back to whenever I was a kid going to the Crescent with my family. We would go up to the Crescent and just go on the ghost tours, and it fascinated me because of all these kind of different history of the place. But the thing that stuck with me the most was the stories that they told about this fraudulent medical practitioner who came to town and turned it into this cancer clinic. Now, let me tell you, at the time, the ghost stories were the ghost tours and the stories that were told were much more sensational. Nowadays, they're much more historic. A friend of mine who's the ghost tour guide for quite some time, he about strange experimentation on patients and heads being sawed into and things like that. And so I'm sitting there thinking, I wonder, how much of this is true. It had these kind of elements of like Stephen King's The Shining meets Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, left me morbidly, fascinated and intrigued, So anyway, and they also have amounts of calcium, found in the floors and found in the walls. In fact, now these are the stories that were told, and these have been told all throughout. Like, I've heard these stories all growing up. I'm from Southwest Missouri, and I even heard that like when I moved to Fayetteville back in 2003. So I moved to Fayetteville in 2003 to go to graduate school. And while in graduate school, these stories, I'm in Arkansas, so I'm thinking, and I got to get down to Eureka Springs. And so I'd go down there, and my fiance at the time, my wife now, Willow and I would go down, and we would go to the Crescent, we'd stay, and we'd just, tool around the town, and we would go on the ghost tours. Now, at that time, that's before, my friend, it was still these very kind of sensational stories. And I just couldn't help, because at this time, I'm an adult and I'm thinking, I wonder how much of this is true. So I started doing some research, the next day, go to the library, doing research. And then I just, I thought, well, what really happened? So that's what spurred me along to make this, this nonfiction graphic novel. So anyway, so the question arises, like, who was Norman Baker, right? So this is Norman Baker. Baker was born in 1889 in Muscatine, Iowa. He was the youngest of 10 siblings. Precocious little kid. He was pretty kind of an unruly little kid. And by the time he was in the 10th grade, he drops out of school to become a machinist. His father was a machinist, and his mother was she wrote poetry, and she contributed to many magazines actually with her poetry. So he had this kind of creative sort of side, but he also had this a machinist sort of engineering side as well from his father. So he goes to work in his father's machine shop. And then he becomes a vaudeville magician. And so to help fund his performances, his vaudeville act, which he was, at this time they're known as like a mentalist, and he was like levitating his people, his assistants, which he called Madame Tangley. He ended up marrying one of his Madame Tangleys, in fact. They weren't married all that long, but anyway, that's kind of a whole other story. But Baker was brilliant, though. He was a bit of a shyster, but he was brilliant. And so while he was doing his vaudeville act, he's like, well, I need to kind of supplement. I need to make a little extra money on the side. So he develops what's known as an air calliope, or what he called the air calliophone. So the calliope, are you all familiar with it? Like a steam-powered calliope? That's what you see at circuses. Okay, so he's doing that, and then at the time, cancer is becoming this leading cause of death in the U.S. Norman Baker's mother dies of cancer, and her death sort of starts, giving him this sort of interest in life extension, and he starts to hear about he's hearing about this doctor, or so-called doctor in Kansas City by the name of Charles Ozias, and he's who claims to have cured cancer, so Baker is thinking, that's really interesting. Time he's starting a radio station, and he's also starting his own like a mail order business, where he has it's basically the equivalent to like a Sears and Roebuck, and he has where you could just basically order anything, like a Sears and Roebuck, basically, all the way from car tires to brooms to to lamps for the house, and he has his own gas station in Muscatine as well. So anyway, and all the while he's starting his radio station. It's called KTNT, Know the Naked Truth, and so he's publicizing these. Like I said, he hears about these cancer cures, so he's like, okay, he steals this guy's cancer cure formula and says, okay, we've cured cancer. I have the cure for cancer. And Baker starts making a multitude of enemies. He starts lashing out at all his enemies which is pretty much everyone in the town, all the way from bankers to lawyers, teachers, the medical profession, a lot of the medical profession. In fact, he starts becoming irate against like the AMA, the American Medical Association, and then of course also the Federal Radio Commission, because his radio station, he's amping up the wattage, and so you can hear it clear out in like Honolulu, way up into Canada, and down in parts of Mexico as well. Which that he kept getting shut down by the Federal Radio Commission, and he was in constant litigations with everybody. Like, anyway, very contentious relationships with everyone. But anyway, Baker's, since he has this cancer cure, right, that he took from Charles Ozias, he starts his Baker Hospital in a former skating rink there in Muscatine, Iowa. And then in his TNT magazine, The Naked Truth, his radio stations Know the Naked Truth, and his magazine is The Naked Truth, where basically along with his medical exposés, like I said, it also served as his general merchandising catalog. But it's in this magazine that he proclaims that I've cured cancer, and that's on the front page of one of his magazines. And in one of these magazines, he talks about how he has these 5 patients, these test patients, and they have cancer. So he basically he prints his December issue in 1929 saying, I've given these 5 test patients that are afflicted with cancer my cancer cure, and this cures cancer, And so anyway, this is December of 1929. By May of 1930, all 5 of these patients, they're dead. And then and Baker republishes that same article, that same magazine, not once, not twice, but 3 different times. And he also keeps proclaiming that on his radio station and all his other different outlets without changing a single word. So that's kind of where red flag number 1 really kind of comes up, that I'm not really quite sure about, some of that. So anyway, the AMA is really starting to pressure the Federal Radio Commission to start cracking down on Norman Baker, and he then loses his license. This is in 1931. And after an unsuccessful attempt to sue the AMA, he starts a radio station down on the Mexican border called XENT, and they're known as the Border Blasters because they're, from the Mexican border into the U.S., and they don't have to follow any of the regulations. And so, eventually decides, well, he's getting kind of tired of that down in Mexico and decides to go back up into the States. And in 1937, he eventually makes his way to Arkansas, and he purchases the downtrodden Crescent Hotel. So this goes right back to where we were when I had the scene with the rats and with the fireplace there. So this would be, Great Depression, and Baker says that his choice for opening up the Crescent or his Baker Hospital in Springs, right? So he's sort of piggybacking on the what they already proclaim as being this health resort area, and so and the pure mountain air and healthy waters. And so first thing Baker does is he decides, he's like, well, I need to come in and remodel, right? And so Baker's obsessed with the color purple. He wears a white suit. He has purple shirts, purple ties. He drives a purple car. It's a Cord Roadster, and this is during a time when all cars were black. And so he was a very flamboyant in his attire and his presentation. So what's Baker do? he transforms the whole hotel into more of what would look like a circus, to our eyes, rather than a hospital. So he basically takes all the beautiful wood, the wood interior, and slathers purple Art Deco triangular patterns like all over the place with purple, yellow, golds, blacks, reds. He puts up propaganda posters all over the walls. Just a hodgepodge of colors, and you can see this is another shot of I mean, when you look at those columns there, it really does look like a circus, He would even put up his propaganda like up above, like you can see, like, quacks are those who do things that enemies can't do, which, he's basically taken, because these guys were known as quacks, like cancer quacks, preying on, people during the Great Depression. So he's basically kind of taken that back and just kind of owning that, So anyway, let's see here. He had, the thing that really, I love architecture, and one of the most things that really breaks my heart as far as the architectural disaster, like what he did to the Crescent, is the wood turned balustrades. In the front, he basically, in order to so patients could, they could push out these gurneys for patients could go out onto the sunroofs out here. He basically poured concrete in their place to make these allow for like sun porches. And so the patient beds were rolled out on that. And this is the thing that forever destroyed or really altered the Victorian look of the original Crescent Hotel. Because when you look at pictures of the Crescent, you're like, well, it looks a little different, Well, that was Baker that did that. He basically destroyed that, and it was hastily done. Like, it was you can still see like the way, like these wrought iron braces and things that were just shoved in there in a hurry in order when they were putting the concrete down. You can still see some of that today, because it was done so shoddily and quickly. Like, some of that's still there, so it's kind of wild. In fact, you can still actually see the chimneys on the Crescent are purple, and that was from when it was the Baker Hospital. To this day, you can go and you can still see some of that. This is his office, and you can't really see it, but he had a bulletproof glass between him and separating him from the lobby, as well as he always had guns nearby. So he actually had machine guns nearby because he was very paranoid. In fact, when he was in court in Davenport, when he was trying to sue the AMA, one time he was kicked out of court for carrying a gun in court, and he always wore he always had a bulletproof vest under his purple shirts and white suits. So anyway, and this is what his brochures look like that he sent all across the U.S. So it's basically, the Baker Hospital, where sick folks get well. We cure cancer tumor without operation, radium, or X-ray. So anyway, that's what he was doing. So the money was rolling in, like, despite the Great Depression. In fact, Eureka Springs was never really affected that much by the Great Depression because of Baker. Like, it really was a boon to that town, while he was there. People were coming from all over the U.S. to go to his hospital, but a lot was happening. But the patient death toll, sadly was rising. But thankfully, so were federal law enforcement investigations. Right. So, in 1939, Baker was finally convicted of mail fraud, and he was sentenced to Leavenworth Penitentiary. So mail fraud, because basically he's sending out all over the mails that we cure cancer tumor, right? So anyway, Yeah, and yeah, it's kind of crazy, just 4 years, right, for that. But it's like, that's what he got. In fact, he only served like 3.5 years. Yeah, you knew it wasn't even a full 4 years. So, after being released from prison, he tries unsuccessfully to open up another Baker hospital. That doesn't work, so he eventually retires down to Miami, Florida, living out his remaining years in a 3-story yacht. And he eventually ends up dying in 1958 of cancer. So what goes around comes around, right? So, yeah. So anyway, what I wanted to do now is just kind of go back to when I was talking about those jars early on that were discovered. So in 2008, this was another really kind of interesting serendipitous sort of thing that happened. Like, I interviewed a guy who, as a child, he and a friend of his, they snuck in to the Crescent Hotel in the early 1940s when it was dormant. This is right after Baker's incarceration, of course. So throughout World War II, the hotel was empty, and he and his little friend, like they snuck in there, and he said it was really interesting to interview him, because he was telling me of what an eerie experience it was going through this place. You know, it was just kind of, you know, scampering of rodents and maybe footprints of the night watchman. It was empty, you know. And instead of these sterile white walls like you would expect to find in a hospital, you know, of course, they found these circus-colored interiors and Art Deco decor, and amongst these these forgotten wheelchairs and cancer is curable posters. So anyway, they moved deeper into the basement that serves as the hospital morgue, and they make a very grim discovery. So what those boys found was the very same macabre set of jars containing the human tissue and the so-called cancer cure elixirs that would be buried and later unearthed on the hotel grounds some 80 years later. So that was kind of crazy. I couldn't believe that when I found out about all that. So the boys were, of course, kind of horrified and fascinated by their discovery. But what they failed to realize was this abandoned building that they entered, it wasn't really a hospital, and nor was it a hotel. It was the remnants of an abandoned theater by a sideshow magician whose performance had ended. His cancer healing elixir was made up of carbolic acid, alcohol, glycerin, spring water, and watermelon seeds. But the formula's true ingredients was demagoguery and populist rhetoric. The relics discovered by these boys, a story about the past and predictions of the future, of a charlatan's performance that had been repeated throughout the ages and continues to this day. One that rather garnishes applause as the curtain falls, ends with an empty silence, an empty promise, an empty cure, and an empty structure. Now, Norman Baker died lonely, but throughout his life, those who met him either became his mortal enemies or his devout followers. Even 60 years after his death, he still divides people. Just after his funeral, his grave was destroyed and later replaced. The graveside to this day is mysteriously decorated with purple flowers on the anniversaries of his death. So, love him or hate him, at the core, this book is about perception. We see history the way that we want to see it. And this very unique nonfiction graphic novel is my best interpretation of this very peculiar person, time, and place. So although Baker has been gone for many years now, echoes of his time at the Eureka Springs still reverberate throughout the Crescent Hotel. So I want to, before I kind of wrap it up, I just really briefly want to go through my process of you know, so yeah, the book blends oral histories, newspaper articles, and Norman Baker. I began working on this in 2008. I've scoured libraries, databases, newspapers, letters, photos, court documents, microfiche. I've gone to multitude of cemeteries. I've stood on Baker's grave. I've interviewed that, and I've interviewed just so many people for this book. And that's all the field research. That's the fun part. But then comes the difficult process of kind of putting it all together, you know. So, and so I would basically just take all of this material and have to organize it. And so that's where it helps having a wife who's a librarian, because she was instrumental in helping me kind of do that, you know. And anyway, I just kind of would put it together chronologically, and then I would kind of separate it out about Crescent Hotel history, Norman Baker history, and so, and then get into my favorite part where I get to sharpen my pencil and get to work. So that's my cat Buzz right there. He's kind of serves as my art director, I guess. But so anyway, and then so this here you can see I do these kind of little roughs, these storyboard type roughs. And then I have put my notes over there once I kind of have it all scripted out. And then you can kind of see tighter pencils, value painting, and then full color painting right here. And then here's another example of just my pencils and then full color. And then I'll go back in with a little bit of digital like lighting effects and things like that every now and then. So use that kind of like special effects. So here you can see once again some of my roughs and then some of my notes. And then here's the tighter pencils, value rendering, and then final rendering. So anyway, so you can kind of see, just kind of showing you guys the process just a little bit here. I picked up a bunch of models. Like I found this little like model of, this is the type of car Norman Baker drove in the late 1930s, Cord. I actually had a friend who had a wheelchair from when it was the Baker Hospital. And so I was able to actually use that as a reference, which was really neat. Found an old radio, found old trucks, old vehicles, and so different items from that era. And then, of course, figuring out the attire from that period. It's interesting because it's not only of that time, but it also has to be of that Ozarks 1930s. And so I love that sort of thing, to be able to try to, I love that kind of challenge, of telling a story, that kind of fits that. So, and then, of course, the Crescent itself is a character in the story. That's the whole thing. Is I really, I wanted it to be very, like you could kind of traverse the different rooms and floors of the Crescent Hotel throughout the different eras, and yet you could kind of see, oh yeah, this is that same room we were just in. You can kind of flip back and be like, oh yeah, it's that same room, but it looks a little different. So like I said, the hotel and Baker are both definitely characters within this story. So as I mentioned before, at the core of this book is about perception. We all see reality and history different. We all draw on our own interpretations based on a myriad of factors that influence our understanding of places and events. And I look forward to taking you all on this journey, and hopefully this book will inspire you all to go out to Eureka Springs, go to the Crescent Hotel, and continue, explore the hotel on your own, and traverse those very same halls that the patients and the staff of the Baker Hospital did so many years ago. So here's kind of what the book's going to look like. And that's about it. So yeah, jump on the Kickstarter if you're interested. And thanks. And if anyone has any kind of questions at all, feel free to Now go for it. No, it's pretty laid back, so yeah.
Well, so
Because I mean, you were like on it. Everything I was saying, I was like, hey, yeah, that's great.
so I was like, following along as you were telling the story, like, oh my gosh, he really has done the research. The thing I wanted to ask you, because the angle that I came at it from was one of the ingredients that he was injecting into his patients
Right.
4 times a day, 6 days a week,
Yeah.
was carbolic acid,
Carbolic acid. Yeah.
which is a poison.
Uh-huh.
So I don't think he was just a quack. I think he was a serial killer.
Well, yeah, okay. Yeah, sure. I mean, that's what's so strange too, that and not only that, you're right, that's very strange. I also find extremely strange that he said no X-ray, no operations, no radium, but yet why are there jars full of human remains? That doesn't he's a conundrum in every way. You're absolutely right. Like, thank you. That's a great point. Once again, it's like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, when you put the pieces together, it's like, well, no, it doesn't really.
And it's interesting to me that, for all because I lived in Eureka Springs in 2000 and worked for the chamber.
Yeah.
And so I went on the ghost tours in the year 2000. And even then until now, I've not heard anyone, like, they'll talk about the ghosts and the medical experiments and all kinds of other stuff, but like, am I the only person who's thought of this? Really? Like, I can't believe that.
Right.
That's
No.
smart.
Yeah. You're right. I know. There's so many things like that it's just like, really? Are you not? Yeah. Even whenever they discovered those jars, I never really heard anyone articulate well, why are those there? Why? And he would even proclaim that in his magazine, like in his TNT magazine. He had pictures like, these are our specimens of these jars, and they have that down at the Crescent in their morgue area. They have those posters showing these jars that Baker was very proud of, but it doesn't make any sense. Like, why? Why do you have that? Like, because there's people today, the ones that are pro Baker, think of it more as he was like a holistic healer, is what they look at it as, which doesn't really, once again, carbolic acid, alcohol, glycerin, and put it in water and brew it like a tea, and they would also inject it, oftentimes like in people's chest. It's very strange. Very strange. They would do that throughout the day, and you're right. That is not. It doesn't cure cancer, and it's not good for you. There's.
Well, did you hear? I mean, I'm sure in your research you saw when he was doing the KT&T thing in Muscatine. He took his equipment outside to like interact with his adoring fans. And there was a man who had some kind of like infection on his skull.
Mandus Johnson.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he literally like removed part of this guy's scalp like in front of a crowd of people. Yes, there's pictures of it.
You need to look at my preview book right over there. There's
Yeah.
Doug knows. Doug's and that's kind of yes. And see, that's where a lot of they would even say like, oh, he saw it into people's heads and stuff. Well, that's where that comes from. So it's like he had some sort of a condition where it's like, it wasn't, what you were seeing was not his brain, but it was actually just kind of removed that top portion of it. Like, and the guy actually, so he didn't, it was benign, whatever it was, because he lived quite a bit, like he lived for a long time, Mandus Johnson did. Yeah. And
it sounded like it was just an infection.
It was like some sort of an infection.
To be drained, basically.
Right, exactly. But Baker thought, and all these people, it's at Weed Park in Muscatine. Willow and I have been to Weed Park, but he pours his well, he doesn't do it. He's back in the back, but he had one of his doctors or whatever pours his medical treatment over his open skull or whatever, and then pops his skull back on. It's so weird. People in the audiences were literally, they were fainting and throwing up in the audience. as this was happening. And then Baker takes it and swigs it down. He takes a big swig of his cancer elixir right after that. So it's so strange. It's the most bizarre thing. And I actually know a guy who, I'm trying to remember I think he might have said it's like his great grandmother, and she was actually around. She may still be around. Like she was there as a teenager when that happened, and she walked right up there and saw like that. And that was part of it. People walked up there, and I didn't know this. It was almost like the way you would do like communion in church. Everybody walked up and goes, and so it's like they walk up and they see this, and they walk past, just so bizarre. It's such a, because he's a showman. And see, that's the thing, is it was all basically like his vaudeville act extended into, the rest of his career, basically. And it's kind of interesting because it all sort of compounded and built on itself. That's where like he always used the calliope, his calliophone. Like he would use that at the Crescent Hotel. He had a calliophone installed at the top of the Crescent. And that thing would blare like all the time, and people were getting fed up with it, because Baker would be up there, and they'd be, and he had his radio station. Like each time he went anywhere, he always would be like, I mean, he was a populist. It was a demagogue, right? So it's like, and that's what he was doing, is he was just kind of preying on these people, and it's very, it's really, it's many years left at the Crescent, even if he hadn't been arrested there, because I do think it was starting to catch up with him around that time, because federal law enforcement were really starting to move in on not only him, but a lot of these sort of quacks at that time, just sort of sending out all their propaganda everywhere. But yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's what's funny about with Baker. There's so many of these little conundrums that you're just like scratching your head going, huh? What? Why did he do that? It doesn't even make any sense. It's so strange. But yeah, that's where that's what, when Doug was back there, yeah, that's where the book starts, is at Weed Park in Muscatine, Iowa. So it's right there with Mandus Johnson. And, one of those classic medicine shows, one of those kind of things. Yeah, for sure. That's great. I'm going to have to listen to your YouTube.
I would like to talk with you.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah.
A little more detail.
That's great. Excellent. Does anyone, Nanny, have anything? Are you good? Doug, you have anyone?
It's called the murderer. Cool. Thanks.
Anyone have any questions at all? Susan?
What room would you suggest staying in?
Oh God, what's I can't, it's in my book over there.
243 is where Michael's supposed
Is it, what is it?
243?
Or 213? Is it
Okay.
213 or is it I can't, it's in my book right there. I can't even think, because I always end up, there's so many little numbers that pop up in my head. I'm afraid I'll say something like the name of a horror novel room or something, like in The Shining or something. I always get confused. But yeah, the one where Michael is, that's the one that's the most famous. Like and he was actually, that's not connected to Baker. He was a kind of like a stonemason. He helped build the hotel. Apparently. There's not. I mean, that's the thing. He's known as Michael, and that the saying goes, the story goes that he was a ladies' man, and he was always up whistling at the ladies, and he was up there trying to get some girl's attention while he was up on working on it, and then he slips and falls and lands on a beam right where that room would be built. And so that's the story, but that's really, I've never found anything to even substantiate that. So who knows? That's just, but that's the room where everybody stays. There's also a room where, well, you can stay in Baker's. I think that's more of a suite, like penthouse type thing. I don't know if you can actually stay there, but where Baker actually stayed, I can't think of that room. And there's also a room if she worked at the Baker Hospital. Once again, who knows, if that's even, or if that's just more of a legend. But there's most of the ghost tours, the ghost stuff is kind of a little hazy, when it comes to that stuff. So you really, of course, many of like Baker's files were just destroyed after he was arrested. He had all his Confederates just sort of get rid of everything, What were you going to say?
I'm sorry if I'm...
No.
But that when they were investigating after they arrested him, they discovered that him and his personal secretary, Thelma Yount,
yeah.
embezzled like $1 million, in those days, $1 million.
Thelma would drive all the money down to Mexico, basically. Like that's what, and Thelma, yeah, that was, which I'm pretty sure Thelma was another one of Baker's girlfriends that would just, she was, yeah. So yeah. I've tried to find more, information on Thelma Yount, and I think, my friend Keith may have a little bit more. I need to ask him about it. He's found maybe a little bit more on her, but yeah, she's kind of the mystery woman, in that story. But yeah, she handled the money, but Baker made sure that most of it went just straight to Mexico. Well, he didn't want to pay taxes or anything like that. No, Yeah, but yeah, so Michael's room or Theodora's room, ask about that, or Baker's room. So when you're at the Crescent, yeah, definitely. They'll know what you're talking about if you say those, but yeah, I just can't think of the number.
I was going to say, especially in October, they've already booked it.
Oh yeah.
You might be able to book it for next
But
year.
Maybe.
You could go on down and, you can go on the ghost tours, just hang out. It's an hour away from here, so it's not bad. I've been going down a lot just to come back, and in fact, I just gave a talk down there on Wednesday at the library there in Eureka. So, yeah, so, yeah. In my book, we kind of go on the ghost tour. You can't go talk about that if you're, with the Crescent, but my book's not about that. It's about the Baker Hospital, but. Anyway, yeah, you could kind of think of it that is like the origin story to the ghosts, I guess. So, but anyway, yeah. Well, thanks so much. And like I said, I've got these little preview books back there, and be sure and grab a little flyer. It has all the information on the Kickstarter, which if you've done Kickstarter before, it's simple, and just different reward tiers, and so.
And you said that's basically like a pre-order.
It's yes, because we've reached our funding goal, and so it's going to happen. So yeah, I mean it's happening. So yeah, I'm just thrilled to death because now, yeah, we can actually just get these books out to everybody. We can. I never was able to find a lot of information on Baker, So that's why I did this, and I'm glad like you're doing your thing, and like people are finally starting to kind of show a little interest in that.
Now, isn't there some kind of a museum or something for him in Muscatine? Or am I?
There's the Muscatine Art Museum, and they have a lot of information. They have a lot of memorabilia, a lot of Baker artifacts there. So that's probably what you're thinking of. In fact, I have a show there next September and October. Yeah, I'm going to have artwork. My original pages will be in there from the book. So thank you. Yeah, I also have work right now from my book in Jonesboro at the Bradbury Art Museum right on campus there. From around the country. And so, yeah, it's a really neat show going on. So I've been busy lately, just been really busy lately. But yeah, that's up right now. So if you happen to be in Jonesboro before, I think that goes down maybe in early November, something like that. So, but yeah, the Muscatine Arts Center is a great place to find information on Baker.
'Cause I saw on YouTube that like some clearly very small, very low budget, very indie production company made a short like docudrama
Right.
about him.
Yeah,
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 it's really bad.
yeah. So, yeah, I mean, well, but I'll have to, yeah, but and his house is still there, Baker's home is still there, and the radio station's not, it's gone, and so is the Baker Hospital in Muscat. It's a parking lot. Hahn office chairs, they're located there, it's their parking lot, so. Which my drawing table chair is a Hahn, so that's kind of a connection right there with so anyway, all right, well, thanks again, guys, I really do appreciate it. So all right, thank you. Thanks. All right.